Hello everybody, and welcome to my channel. When it comes to films, picking a favorite movie is no easy task. Without a doubt, no two people will interpret a film in the same way, and a lot of what people get out of a film is usually very opinion-based. And with that said, I wanted to take this opportunity not just to talk about my favorite film, but to talk about my favorite movie franchise as well. The Evil Dead trilogy. I actually did already make a review a while back that's kind of like a vlog where I talked about the Evil Dead trilogy, but I felt like the Evil Dead really deserved better than that, so this is kind of a chance to redeem my love for the series. Surprisingly enough, the Evil Dead has actually become a very important part of my life, and it's not only the reason that I love horror films so much, but it was also what led me to fully being able to appreciate just the art of film. I actually won't be talking much about the 2013 remake or the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV show very much in this video, but all you really need to know about those is that I enjoy both of them. Now without further ado, here is my review of the Evil Dead trilogy. First thing you need to know about The Evil Dead is that it started off as a short film titled Within the Woods. The film was created in 1978 and it was directed by none other than Sam Raimi, and this would of course serve as his first attempt at making a horror movie. You can actually find this short on YouTube, but beware, it's not the best quality. This short film would lead into Sam Raimi's first feature film, The Evil Dead. To me, this is one of the most immersive films ever made. It uses the most simple of horror plots. A group of college students heads up to a cabin in the woods to stay on vacation. By the way, kudos for not claiming they're high schoolers, because most horror movies would usually do that. Everything seems normal at first, but one of the characters by the name of Cheryl, who is also the main character, Ash's sister, starts growing paranoid as she feels she is being taunted by evil spirits. To top it all off, an ugly book bound in human flesh is found in the basement along with a tape recorder. They decide to play the tape recorder, see what's on it, and from then on, all hell breaks loose. Now, despite a overly simple plot, the movie is extremely creative with its horror concepts. The evil spirits in this movie are called Deadites, and they're kind of a combination of what people know of possession and what people know of zombies. Part of what helps to make this movie so disturbing is that everyone who gets possessed has like a connection to one another. It's a lot like a zombie, but definitely a lot creepier. And of course, the only way to defeat these Deadites is through the act of bodily dismemberment. So if you're expecting tons of limbs flying around, you're gonna get exactly that. I also like the idea of using like the H.P. Lovecraft Necronomicon as like the main power source to these demons. Just the inclusion of the Book of the Dead kind of adds a lot of mythos to the Evil Dead franchise. Considering how much this movie was able to make back, this movie was made for very cheap. I think it was only like $350,000. Which is insane for how much work went into this film. Supposedly it took a lot of funding to get made though. The movie has a very like do-it-yourself feel to it, and I think that's part of why I love it so much. There's lots of things in this movie that feel very cheap, but I think they actually work in favor of the film and the overall experience. Yet despite its flaws, the film is able to fully immerse you and just pull you into it, and by the end of it, you've kind of forgotten about all of the flaws the movie had. The do-it-yourself feel is also very inspiring, because like after watching this movie, I feel like as long as I'm willing to put the work into it, anything is possible. It's also very entertaining to find out about how this movie was made. I have read tons of articles about all the things that went on behind the scenes for all these films. What's so surprising about this movie is so much of it is actually real. No, I'm not saying that the events of this movie are real, but what I'm kind of saying is that so much of this movie relied on like these crazy stunts and camera tricks. The location of the cabin alone is extremely iconic to the franchise, and it's actually a real abandoned cabin, which just kind of helps add to the overall creepiness of it. It also adds to the docu-horror kind of feel that it has. I've always kind of liked the idea of those films just because they kind of feel like you're actually there with the people and you're experiencing everything they are. The whole movie is just an attempt to see how far Raimi and his cast and crew are willing to go to get a good shot. Real guns were shot, windows were shattered, actors were thrown into shelves, real daggers were used, and like the Deadites had to use these white eye contact lenses that they couldn't even see out of. It was a miracle that nobody died. It's also a very ambitious film with the way it's shot. Sam Raimi even invented new camera tricks for this, and probably the most famous is when we can see from the point of view of the evil spirits as they're following them to the cabin. Raimi uses a lot of crazy shots, and there's a lot of like camera tilting that just kind of helps to the uneasy insanity of it all. The Evil Dead is also one of the goriest films ever made. It has this kind of like perfect blend where it's not just the gore alone that it's relying on, but it also relies on like this close claustrophobic atmosphere and great music and special effects, and everything just works in favor of it. But of course the gory stuff is always fun to watch. Probably the goriest scene in this movie, and the scene that shocks me every single time I see it, is the stop motion claymation scene. It is rare that any horror movie has the same effect on me as The Evil Dead. I don't know if any movie even comes close to it. But are there any negatives to the film? If I had any, maybe that some scenes are like unintentionally funny, and that seems like something that would work against the film, like it definitely should. But I actually kind of like that because it kind of just adds to the do-it-yourself feel of it. So it's one of those things where it feels like it should harm the film, but it actually like increases the experience for me. Also, there are a few Three Stooges references in this film, and it just goes to show like how much Sam Raimi loves comedy, and that would only further be proven with the sequel. I can't believe I didn't even mention Bruce Campbell yet. Playing the lead of Ash Williams, Bruce Campbell does a great job. His character is very different here than he will be for the rest of the series. What Evil Dead managed to do that was very different from like any other horror movie at the time was the main protagonist was a male, and somehow it ended up working perfectly. I think the viewers can actually like kind of feel the emotions that he's feeling throughout the movie, and a lot of that may be due to the camera work, but I also think he gives a great performance. His character would only improve with the sequel, which brings me to Evil Dead 2: Dead by Dawn is without a doubt my favorite film of all time. It has everything I could ever want from a horror movie or a comedy or just a movie in general. It takes place right after the first film, but it kind of gives us like an introduction just to fill us in on the things that happened last time. Some fans actually claim that like Evil Dead 2 is a remake of the first one, and that's kind of because in the opening scene they exclude a lot of the main characters from the first film. But I always kind of saw that as a way of just them, you know, taking what was necessary to remember about the first movie and putting that in, just as kind of like a way to fill people in so they could see what happened last time in case they didn't see the first film or they forgot. I've always kind of liked the idea, though, of doing that, because if I want to watch Evil Dead 2, I don't always have to feel like I have to watch the first one. Evil Dead 2 starts immediately with Ash being possessed and turned into a deadite, but he is saved when the sun comes up. But that only leads to him being chased into the cabin for night number 2. This takes a very different turn from like most horror sequels. It stars the same protagonist, and it takes place like directly after the first film. It's an ingenious idea because it only makes like Ash's chances of escaping feel even more hopeless. The film amps up everything that was good about the first film, but there's only one big change. This time, it's a horror comedy. In theory, most horror movies that eventually turn to the comedy route don't really work out the best, but Evil Dead 2 works so well because Sam Raimi takes the things that were unintentionally funny about the first film and uses his knowledge of Three Stooges and slapstick comedy to make it intentionally funny. Like the first film, Evil Dead 2 is completely relentless and never lets down. This movie is an experience. It feels like going on one of those like haunted house roller coaster rides. Even if I know where it's going every time I rewatch it, I still have a lot of fun with it. It's filled with so many memorable gags and visuals. There's Ash's possessed hand, Linda's dancing corpse, blood pouring from walls, laughing deerhead, Evil Ed, Henrietta. There's so many memorable things about this film. Most of the humor here comes from Bruce Campbell himself, who gives probably the most dedicated slapstick performance of all time. His pain is our enjoyment. The movie also brings up the idea that maybe Ash is going crazy, which works perfectly well in this scenario. And even when not being hilarious, the movie is still able to give you a sense of dread, as you know that the demons are not going to let Ash go. A lot of this film is actually about Ash's development as a character. In the first Evil Dead, there's that great scene where like Scotty is defending himself with the axe and he's chopping his girlfriend up, and then Ash is just like cowering in the corner. And in the second movie is when Ash has to learn to fight back. The film also introduced the idea of the chainsaw hand, which is the coolest idea ever, even if not entirely practical. Evil Dead 2 is what made Ash Williams Bruce's best role and what made people see him as such a great actor. Also, Annie Knowby is another great character in this movie that doesn't really get talked about a lot. She's not as funny as Bruce, but that's because she's taken the role pretty seriously, and she does a great job and maybe one of the best so-called scream queens. The film is jam-packed with so much to offer and thinks up of so many ways to improve upon the original. Just the fact that Professor Knowby's wife Henrietta was like in the basement throughout the entire first film, that's an amazing thought. I love that. Also, Ted Raimi as Henrietta is one of the best over-the-top performances I've ever seen. The film also ends on like a perfect note. It's my favorite end of the trilogy and possibly my favorite movie ending of all time, as it fits Ash's character perfectly. Without a doubt, Evil Dead 2 is the most fun horror movie I have ever seen. It makes me happy every time I watch it. On to the third film. Alright, here we are, the third and final film of the Evil Dead trilogy, Army of Darkness. Now, out of all three of these movies, Army of Darkness is actually my least favorite. Now, before you all send death threats, I still love this movie. It's just, compared to the other two, I consider it like a lesser film. It's less of a horror comedy and more of like a action comedy this time, with lots of elements of the Evil Dead trilogy carried over to this film. It's set right after the second film, in which Ash is sent through a time portal to medieval times. At the end of Evil Dead 2, Ash was hailed as a savior. In this film, he's put in chains and taken to a witch pit. It's best not to question the continuity of Evil Dead. Army of Darkness is about Ash's journey to get home when he accidentally reads the words from the Necronomicon wrong, unleashing an army of the dead that he has to stay and help fight. This movie really shows how great the Evil Dead trilogy works as a character piece, or just at developing Ash's character. He went from being terrified to learning to fight back to being a complete dick. When people think of Bruce Campbell, they think of great one-liners, and this is the film that did it for him. He definitely had some great lines in Evil Dead 2, but this has the best lines of the entire trilogy. There was actually a very long wait between Evil Dead 2 and this film. Raimi wanted to make this film, but he knew it would be too expensive, so he kind of took a break to make Darkman, and after he made Darkman, Universal let him make this movie. Army of Darkness is everything you love about the previous movies in the trilogy. More slapstick, more deadites, more Ash. Once again, a tremendous amount of work went into the makeup and the effects. The set design in this movie is also great. The castle they use is actually a real set piece that they had. A lot more characters are introduced in Army of Darkness, as it is a film on a bigger scale. My most favorite addition in this movie are the deadite skeletons, which are kind of put in as a reference to Jason and the Argonauts. There's just something that I really love about skeletons in horror movies, and maybe it's because I find them more funny than scary, which really works in this film's favor. The movie also has a lot more surreal imagery in it. There's the scene in the windmill just describes it best, I think, where there's tiny ashes and then there's the eyeball in Ash's shoulder. It's so weird and just so entertaining. I just love the idea that there's really like no limit to what the Deadites can do, and Raimi's able to get really imaginative with it. But this movie actually did suffer from a lot of studio interference, which seems to be a ever-growing problem in the world of Hollywood. This movie is part of the reason that Bruce Campbell only does TV shows and indie movies now. The movie was originally going to be called Medieval Dead, which, if you ask me, was a much better title, but I guess the studio didn't like that, so Raimi had to change it to Army of Darkness, which was his second choice. The film also almost had a NC-17 rating somehow, so Sam Raimi had to convince them that the violence happening to the characters in this movie are happening to skeletons, not real people, so it really should not be NC-17. Also, if this came out today, I'm pretty sure it'd be like a PG-13. But the biggest change, of course, was the ending of this movie. There was actually two endings, the I Slept Too Long ending and the Hail to the King Baby ending. The change was made because the studio thought the original ending wasn't happy enough, even though it fit perfectly well with Ash's character. This is actually one of those rare times where I actually love both endings, and it's really hard for me to pick a favorite one. But if we did get the I Slept Too Long ending, it would have made way for an Evil Dead 4. Studio meddling also kind of hurt the box office results, as it wasn't really advertised as an Evil Dead movie. But even with that said, today this movie is a definite cult classic. Now, if I had one complaint about Army of Darkness, it would be that I find the first half of the film to be a lot stronger than the second half. A lot of movies seem to do that thing where they fall into like a big end battle, and I kind of like lose a bit of interest towards the end of it. I still enjoy watching like the big battles at the end of movies, but I always feel like the smaller scale stuff is just a lot more interesting to me. A good example of that is like with Return of the King, when they're cutting between the big battle and the stuff with Frodo, and I've always found like the Frodo stuff a lot more interesting. But even with that said, I still do enjoy the ending, and I still love this movie. It is without a doubt a great end to the trilogy. In conclusion, Evil Dead is great. It is a series that has greatly changed my life and the way that I look at films in general. I give a strong recommendation of all three films to anyone with a strong stomach, because they might need it to watch the first film. And I definitely recommend you do watch these in order. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.